I'm Dave Laird.
I'm Matt Booker.
And welcome to a special third annual International David Foster Wallace ISU Conference recap episode of The Great Concavity. Kind of a mouthful, right?
That's maybe our longest intro yet.
I think so. Yeah, for sure. So Matt, welcome to summer. It's sort of we're halfway through here. It's August. How's things been for you?
It's the dog days of summer in Texas right now. Each day right now is just excruciatingly hot, and it's driving people either indoors where there's air conditioning or to a swimming pool or out of the state. So
out of the state.
I just got back from a vacation in Seattle, and that was fantastic. I missed you from the other side of the Puget Sound. I probably could have
so
waved
close,
to you.
Matt. Yeah, almost. I think it's like a half an hour ferry ride or something like that.
Yeah, so I think it's maybe longer than that, but
maybe an hour.
I was staying on the other side of Puget Sound in Bainbridge Island, and had to take the ferry into Seattle. So when you're out there in the middle of the sound, you can kind of see what I thought was part of Canada from up there.
Yeah, Vancouver Island.
Pretty close. But the weather was much chillier and beautiful.
Yeah.
And it was hard getting back to Austin and getting in my car, which had been sitting out in the sun for 5 days, just baking out in 100-degree weather. So right now it's truly the dog days of summer in Texas, but I'm looking forward to school starting in a couple weeks here and kids going back to school and kind of getting in that groove. So how's your summer been so far?
My summer has been absolutely bananas. We moved cities from Kelowna to Victoria at the very end of June. So that's why you and I were so close at that point, is because I now live in Victoria, BC. And so 2 weeks after that, I defended my thesis back in Kelowna. So I made a trip back home and had the thesis defense. It was about 2 hours. Jeff Sievers was my external reviewer, and we've talked about him on the show before. He's out of UBC Vancouver. So he had a couple questions for me about my thesis, and each of my 3 supervisors did as well. Lasted for about 2 hours, and I came back in and they said I passed. So that was great.
Wow, that's great. So he came up from Vancouver for your...
He was actually via Skype.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so he was a big glowing head on the wall, and then everyone else was live, and had a bit of a live studio audience with my parents were there, and my wife Rachel was there, my sister, and a couple friends were there. So that was nice to see familiar faces.
Well,
in the
congrats.
Yeah, thanks, man. So since then, I've been kind of doing a few very minor sort of MLA type revisions, and I'm just in the process of uploading the final document to the server right now. And then once it's there, it'll be public domain, and we can post a link to it in the show notes of this later if people are interested in reading my 80-page thesis on Christian soteriology and infinite jest.
You want to define that for us?
Yeah, soteriology is the branch of theology that is interested in salvation, the question of salvation. So I gave a paper at the conference just recently. Last weekend, I was in Illinois for the third annual Wallace Conference, and gave sort of a very shortened chapter of my thesis, chapter on Mario Incandenza's role in that whole equation of salvation. So I gave that talk, and I was on a panel with Samantha Wallace, who we're going to hear from on this episode. And there was a beautiful moment where and we talk about this in the interview, but she mentioned our show, and everyone in the room just started applauding for the Great Concavity. And so that was like a really soul-affirming moment for me at the conference. Wow. So big shout out to everyone in that room who was there for that. Thank you so much for your feedback, and being at the conference and talking Wallace with people last weekend was just totally phenomenal, and had some really cool conversations with listeners and people who really follow the show closely. So I'd give a shout out to a really cool father and son team that were there from Pennsylvania, Fran and Dan. They came up to me on the first night during Jenny Baker, her performance. And so they talked to me a bit about the show and how they're fans of it. Dennis Frank is another listener that I got to talk to, and as well as Barbara Balfour from Montreal. She's an artist who does visual stuff with Infinite Jest, specifically to do with color and also some erasure poetry. So her and Corrie had lots to talk about, Corrie Baldauf. And she came up on the last day and gave me a copy of her book, The Inkiest Black, which is very cool, very beautiful hardcover book that people should check out. And it's all about color in Infinite Jest, as well as some other things. So big shout out to all of those people.
Let me back up and say that the conference, the past 2 years before this one, the conference has been held in late May. And I attended both of those conferences and was able to present papers at them and meet everyone. And I had a really fantastic time.
Yeah.
Also representing Sideshow Media Group there.
Right, yeah.
But this time around, they moved the conference for various reasons. They moved it to the late July, which overlapped with an important family reunion for me, which was out in Seattle this year. And I was not able to attend the conference. So I'm already talking to the planning committee about getting a different date for next year so that it doesn't overlap for me and I can attend. And it's pretty selfish of me because I know there's a lot of people who want to attend, but I really want to attend. Yeah. And I want to be able to be a part of it. And, you know, what's interesting to me is I used to be involved in some other online communities, and in a way, they sort of annoyed me, and I was sort of annoyed by people who were like really into their online community. Right. And I kind of had to take a hard look in the mirror and say like, wow, you really do care a lot about this Wallace community. Like, why do you hate these other people who they love their communities so much? And, you know, for me, I guess I don't see it as like an online community. I see it as like a real group of friends, and like it's sort of like you're not supposed to be friends in academia. You're supposed to be like this
rivals.
You're supposed to be like, I don't know what you're supposed to be like, and like I'm not in academia, so it's like, well, screw it. Who cares what anyone else thinks? Like, these are my friends, and I want to see them.
Totally.
So I want to go for that reason, just to be, you know, part of the community and like see people that I know. And like, it is always a very energizing experience for me. I really get a lot out of being around that kind of energy. And I always come away with like tons of inspiration. So maybe you can talk about that, 'cause you're a little closer to having just gotten back from it.
Yeah, that was all of that stuff you just said was huge for me. Like, I came away from last weekend just feeling so revitalized and so excited to keep plugging away with concavity and with, you know, reading all the great secondary material that's coming out on Wallace, a lot of which was kind of on our radar, and we'll be hoping to bring on a lot of future guests who are publishing, you know, monographs, like Lucas Thompson and Clare Hayes Brady and people like that. And like you said, a lot of people came away from this conference saying, you know, the academic stuff is great. It's great to have the panels and the Q&As and all that. But what really makes this conference so special is just the hangout time, you know, the extracurricular time at the pubs after. And some of us rented an Airbnb house. Ryan Marnaine set up a house, and there was about 7 of us staying there. Huge, like 4,000 square foot house, several bathrooms, like lots of bedrooms. And we just hung out till 3 a.m. every night, you know, drinking beer and talking Wallace. So sleep was an issue for a lot of us at the conference, you know, like 4 hours a night kind of thing. But it's worth it when you only see those people once a year who are so invested in this community like you, and to get to you just want all the time you can to talk to them. So that was a really fantastic element to the conference. And I will say, Matt, that your name came up a lot at the conference, and your presence was very sorely missed.
I appreciate that, and it means a lot to me. And a couple of people said that to me, and it just really confirmed all of my feelings about, you know, how much I need to stay invested in this stuff and really keep communicating and connecting with people and meeting new people. And there's tons of people there that I meet for the first time who make a huge impression on me, and I end up, communicating with online all throughout the year. And then we get
Totally.
this one opportunity once a year to hang out. And like, it just also confirmed like how much I have to be there next year. I'm like, I have to be there.
Yeah.
So
against all odds, Matt Booker.
Whatever it takes, I'm gonna be there. So
Yeah.
no, it's a really great thing, and I'm really glad that ISU and Charlie Harris and Jane Carmen and Ryan Adele and all the people who worked on bringing the conference to life. I'm glad that they have created this thing and kept it going. And I'm pretty certain it will be at ISU next year. And that, it sounds like all indications are the 4th annual conference will happen in 2017.
Yeah, definitely sounds like that. We had a kind of a debrief on the very last day with people who were still there. There's probably about 40, 50 people in the room. And we talked about, logistical things for next year. And one of the things that came up was the date. And a lot of people expressed that late July was a challenge for them and that something like mid-June or early June next year would be better. And I specifically said, we need Matt Booker here next year. And everyone kind of laughed and everyone was like, yep, definitely.
Thank you for that, Dave.
Yeah, man. Yeah,
thanks
I got
for
your
looking
back.
out for my interest. I would have said that if I was there. So.
You bet, man. I got your back. So we have a really interesting 2-part episode coming up here. So they're going to be 17.1 and episode 17.2. And what follows after this is going to be a series of interviews that I got to do with people at the conference. So I brought my podcast mic, I walked around with it, lugged it around, and just kind of approached people throughout the weekend who had, really interesting talks that I got to see, or people who are, well known in the community who've published a lot on Wallace, or you're going to see even a couple familiar faces, people we've had on the show before. So it's fun to get to catch up with them again and record that. So today on episode 17.1, we are going to hear from Michael O'Connell, an interview with him, whom we've talked about before on the show, his essay, Your Temple is Self and Sentiment.
Right.
Then Marshall Boswell, who, if you've done any kind of extracurricular study in Wallace, you'll know that he's one of the earliest scholars. He's been at it for a long time, and he was the keynote speaker this year.
He's the author of Understanding David Foster Wallace.
That's right. An editor on tons of the new pieces that have been published by Bloomsbury. Then we have Jeff Sievers, who's out of UBC Vancouver. We just talked about him. He's been publishing a ton on Wallace. He's got a book forthcoming, so it's great to catch up with him. Then we've got Corrie Baldauf, who was a guest on episode 4 of the show. Then we're going to hear from Matt Luter, who's did a panel with Corrie and with Mike Miley. So we're going to hear from Corrie, Matt, and then Mike Miley. And then lastly today, Samantha Wallace, who was her first time at the David Foster Wallace conference.
No relation.
No relation. Samantha, no relation Wallace. And her and I were on the same panel. So we got to do the Q&A together, and that was great. So we're going to hear from her. And then on episode 17.2, we've got a whole bunch more interviews. And a lot of these I did actually back at our house because a lot of these people were staying at the house. So we just found a big bedroom, set up the mic, went for it. So the first of which is going to be Melissa Holton, who is a friend of yours from Austin.
Right.
She did a great paper on the Gothic, Infinite Jest and the Gothic. So
yeah, that's her thing. She's a Gothic expert.
Yeah, totally. And I got to moderate her panel, which was rad. So that was a lot of fun. Then we're going to hear from Jane Carmen, who's the main organizer of the first 2 years of the conference. And this year was kind of in a more of a support role, but she's been, absolutely fundamental in planning this conference over the years. Then we're going to hear from Josh Katz and Emily Spalding, who have written an Infinite Jest screenplay. So we'll hear about their experience with that and what comes next for them. Then Tony McMahon from Melbourne, Australia, who's been at every conference I've ever been to, just got his PhD, and he's absolutely a riot and, a huge voice in the Wallace community. Then we have Ryan Marnane, who was also staying at the house. He's big into Wallace's literary fiction, the nonfiction stuff. And so we've talked about him on the show before with Josh Royland. And then finally, 2 familiar faces. We're going to have Rob Short and Chris Ayers together in a room with myself talking about the conference and our experience of the weekend. So that's what we have to look forward to here, Matt, in episode 17.1 and 2.
Enjoy, everyone. I think there's a ton of great stuff in these interviews, and I really wish I could have been there in person, but this is the next best thing for all of us who couldn't attend the conference. So sit back and enjoy listening to really the heart and soul of the whole David Foster Wallace community.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. And one last thing that we'll mention is we actually have introduced the very first contest on the Great Concavity.
Right.
Yeah. So on Twitter about a week ago, this is the last day of the conference, we posted through at Concavity Show on Twitter a contest. And what it is a photo caption contest. So the previous night, a bunch of us went to Dairy Queen. Things got a little bit wacky, and someone had the idea, I think it was Chris Ayres, to reenact The Last Supper by Leonardo da Vinci. So we're all sitting there with our various confectionaries from Dairy Queen, and we took a similar sort of photo to that. So what you can do as a listener is you can go on, scroll down a bit. It's about a week ago on our Twitter feed, and we'll repost this too in the next week or two. And you're going to try and caption the photo. We've already had a bunch of great entries. Some of them just made me just almost cry laughing. And the prizes for this are going to be a full set of Chris Ayres Infinite Jest posters,
which you can see on Poor York Entertainment Tumblr.
That's right. So Chris generously donated, I think it was 8 or 9 posters. I've got 2 tubes of them. And the winner, I'll get your address. I'll ship them out to you gratis, and you will get to enjoy some very inspired fan art by Chris Ayres, a good friend of ours.
Yeah, so take a look at the picture that's on Twitter, and we'll put it on our Facebook page and our Podbean and Instagram. And you can email us at concavityshow@gmail.com and send us your captions, and then we'll announce the winners on the part 2 of this podcast.
Yeah, maybe we'll probably give about a week or 2 after this comes out, and then we'll let you guys know when the deadline's going to be. Sound good?
And it had to have taken place because Ryan Marnade looks like Jesus.
Yeah, well, that's why I got chosen, because he has this super long hair, right?
And the beard and everything.
And the beard. Yeah. And make sure you look closely at the photo, too, because there's some pretty sweet stuff going on in the background.
Yeah, Rob. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, everyone, for listening. Thanks again to Robin O'Neill, as usual, Parquet Courts, and enjoy the series of interviews to follow. All right, so this is the first of a series of brief interviews at the 2016 David Foster Wallace Conference, the 3rd annual one. And I'm sitting here with Michael O'Connell, who is someone we've talked about on the show before. He's the author of Your Temple is Self and Sentiment. What is the second clause in that title?
I think it's David Foster Wallace's Diagnostic Novels, or something like that.
Yeah. So we talked about your work on the last episode with Edmund, and your ideas that in a theological discourse about Wallace, it makes sense to think of him, as a Christian writer, a Catholic writer. So tell us a bit more about your work on Wallace, what you're talking about at the conference.
Sure. So I wanted to say in that discussion, you guys had mentioned, whether it made sense to think of him exclusively as a Christian writer. And I wanted to say that I don't think that we need to talk about him as a Christian writer. I think the way that I ended that essay is to be like, it's productive to talk about Christian elements in his work, and there's certain biographical reasons to do so, and certainly thematic reasons to do so. But he's not, exclusively Christian or, a Catholic or anything like that. Yeah. So there are other productive ways to talk about theology and religion in Wallace's work. But there's definitely a lot of Christian elements worth following up on and discussing. That's what I tried to do in that essay.
Yeah, very well, I might add.
Oh, thank you. It's nice to hear.
Yeah, it was funny. I did this thesis on Wallace and theology, and for some reason in all my secondary reading never came across your work, and we talked about this yesterday. And then Matt mentioned it on one of our early episodes, and I was like, oh, I haven't heard of that one. Now I need to check it out. And then you made some claims in it that I was like, oh no, this is my thesis. But actually it was really helpful because I got to use some of your work as a jumping point for expansion or whatever,
Yeah.
So that was really helpful.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, obviously you write stuff and then it goes out into the world and you never know if anybody actually sees it. I think I mentioned this yesterday that I actually at some point tried to Google Wallace and religion to see if my essay came up, and it didn't. So I don't know if the keywords are wrong or if it's not archived out there. It's in Christianity and Literature, which is a pretty big journal. So And yeah, when I wrote it, there wasn't a whole lot about Wallace and Christianity. And then I sent it in, the time between when it got submitted and when it got published. I was very nervous that somebody was going to come along and write a similar thing, because I was like, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit here that, I want to make sure that...
A very John 15 reference there with the abiding in the vine and stuff.
Yeah.
There's a certain paranoia to this academic world, right? Where it's like you have to publish fast and really cross your fingers that someone else doesn't beat you to the punch, I guess.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. Especially with stuff like about Wallace, which it keeps expanding. The Wallace critical discourse just gets exponentially bigger, it seems like, year by year. So trying to get it on the ground floor and make your claims, and hopefully other people then will sort of incorporate your work into the larger discussion. It doesn't kind of just get fallen to the wayside.
Yeah, totally. So what are you talking about at the conference? So you're on today, is that right?
Yeah, we're going to talk later. There's two panels back to back about Wallace and religion. My original proposal was that I was going to sort of crib some ideas from the essay that I published about Wallace and conversion, and the way that he writes about conversion stories. But then when I started looking into it, I saw that Matt Booker had given a talk basically that was Wallace and conversion at last year's conference. The Pale King and Saul's conversion. Yeah, exactly. The Fogel novella and how it tracks sort of these traditional Christian elements of the conversion story. So I was like, well, I don't want to just sort of retread old grounds, both my own and Matt. So then what I'm going to focus on today is sort of talking about not just conversion moments, but what happens after conversion moments in Wallace's work. So I think you mentioned yesterday in your talk talking about Barry Loach and how Mario sort of saves him and what happens to turn Loach's life around. And I'm just going to use that sort of as a jumping off point, because in the novel, Loach apparently undergoes this important transformation, but then if you see what he does in the rest of the book, he's just kind of hanging out, taping ankles. Totally. It's not like he has this sort of profound role as somebody who's been saved. He just kind of keeps on keeping on. Which is fine. He's a minor character in that scene anyways. Mario is really the key figure, which is what you were arguing yesterday, and I think is totally true. Thank you. I appreciate the validation. But then in The Pale King, the similar thing happens with, I think, both Chris Vogel and Lane Dean Jr., where they have sort of conversion moments in the novel where they, Vogel's is, I think, the most famous in Wallace's work. Just goes on and on about how he goes from nihilism and wasteoid nihilism, to, and he's called to account and he embraces his role. But if you really think about it, if you step back from his telling of it and you're like, okay, well, he's an IRS agent, there's that 3 pages of so-and-so turns a page, so-and-so, and he's in the Chris Vogel turns a page, and you're like, how different is this than sitting and watching As the World Turns? Like, there's a difference, but is it in kind? Is it in significance? And I think it's even more dramatic with Lane Dean Jr. When you first see him, he's already Christian, and that matters to him clearly, but he's, trying to decide if he and his girlfriend should have an abortion. And the way the story ends is about, he gets insight into her own view of the matter, and he sort of is able to see things from her perspective, which gives him, maybe he calls it, I think, a moment of grace to embrace his role, to love her. I read that as sort of a conversion moment as well, where he sort of finds out what it means to actually live out his beliefs in a real way. But then when we come back to him in the novel, he's sitting in his office thinking about ways to kill himself with Jell-O. And so you're like, okay, what does it mean that he undergoes this conversion, but it's not like he's automatically perfected or something. Exactly. I wonder if this makes me think about the Kenyon speech and the way that real freedom is achieved according to Wallace is by serving others in myriad petty, unsexy ways every day. And I wonder if real conversion just looks like, what seemingly menial and banal service to others. But that's a very Christian ideal in the New Testament, right? Absolutely. And I talk a little bit about, both in the essay and then today, I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of this concept of acedia, that even if you, have a conversion moment and embrace faith or something transcendent or bigger than yourself, you're still going to fall prey to spiritual sloth, or this idea that maybe nothing really matters, and that going through the day-to-day slog is hard and difficult, and no matter what you believe in, that's always going to be true. Which I think is probably the overarching theme of The Pale King.
Yeah, totally.
But at the end, there's that passage where, in the section of notes that Michael Peach includes at the end, that if you go through the most boring things imaginable, televised golf or tax returns, you'll come out the other side, and it's constant bliss in every atom is the line. So, which is, I think in the last podcast, Pater Edmund referenced that same passage, right? That this is a very Christian idea that if you sort of embrace suffering and go through it and don't try to run from it, you'll come out the other side. And I think that Wallace maybe wanted to believe that, but I don't think we really see that happen in his work. And that's sort of where my talk today ends, of just like, so what does that mean? Does it mean that it's not true, or he couldn't really find a way to write about it, or just didn't get to? Because obviously he was suffering from his own things at the time. So, and I don't know, I find that to be sort of a compelling question.
Yeah. Well, that's great. Well, I look forward to the talk. I'll be there.
Cool.
And how's your experience at the conference been so far? What's the vibe, and any highlights thus far?
Yeah, it's been really fun. I've really enjoyed both getting to meet people that I've seen or interacted with on sort of like Wallace Twitter or Wallace L. It's like, oh wow, I can put a face to a name, and that's really neat. And then it's just great to be in a room with a bunch of other people who've read the same work as you have, and really, obviously, it matters to them in the way that it matters to you. So, I don't know, last night there was a performance of Jenny's...
Jenny Baker, erasure poetry with Patrick Green. Session music.
Just like, this is so cool that these people have spent their time... taking
talents, doing these amazing artistic projects.
Exactly.
The ways in which people engage with Wallace, and through scholarship and through art and visual art and music, and is just so cool to see all these different talents that people bring to the table, and there's so many different ways that it just sparks out.
Yeah, absolutely. That's something that's really struck me. We were just in a panel talking about Infinite Winter, and 3/4 of the people, 4/5 of the people that were sitting at the table who had been the guides were all artists of sorts, or people who have done stuff with the text. And I was like, this is really, an impressive testament to Wallace's work, but also other people's creativity and how that brings people together. Which has been really, it's been really neat.
So good vibes.
Yeah, fantastic. It's been really nice.
Totally. I concur. Well, awesome. Thank you, Michael, for having a brief interview. Sit down here.
Yeah, glad to do it.
And I look forward to your talk later today.
Thank you so much. Good to see you.
All right. Thanks. All right. I'm here with scholar Marshall Boswell. Marshall, thanks for hanging out and having a little chat. You were the keynote speaker at the conference this year. What was your topic, and what was some of the response that you had in the conversation that followed?
Well, thanks for talking to me, Dave.
Hey, thanks for coming on. You're like one of the first Wallace scholars who got to the material, and you've been so influential in the scholarship. And if you look at any bibliography for any piece on Wallace, like, your name's always there. So
thank you for saying that. One thing I did say is in the talk is that it has been extraordinary watching the field explode. That early book I did in 2003, I had no idea what would happen to Wallace studies, and when the field took off, I kind of feel like I was standing around with a rope around my ankle that I didn't know was there, and the train left, and I've been running to catch up ever since.
Yeah, no kidding.
So when Charles Harris, who's a hero of mine because of his bar scholarship, which was very important to me when I was an undergraduate, and even after that, asked me to do this, I said yes before I even took a second breath, but then instantly felt an air of panic because I just didn't know what I was going to say, and I didn't think I would have anything to say. So, but then serendipitously, a week later, I was asked to contribute to a volume, the Cambridge Companion, which is going to come out in a year or two, and it's being edited by Ralph Clare.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe
I met Ralph in Paris.
Yes, Ralph was there. Yeah. And the beautiful thing about Ralph's request is that it came with a very detailed abstract of the essay he wanted me to write. It was an outline ready-made. So
that makes it easy.
It is. So I just instantly went to work on that essay. So what he asked for and what the talk tried to address was Wallace's presence and his influences in the late 80s and early 90s. One of the questioners at the talk asked about other writers from Wallace's generation that we should be reading because Wallace has become so central. And I do think that is an interesting development. Wallace has kind of taken the air out of the room in a way. He's so big and he's so central that we lose sight of the fact that he was part of a bigger, broader movement of writers who were all wrestling with a lot of the same ideas, and they were sharing ideas. So, and these ideas were nascent, and they were coming out of a period before the internet. They were coming out of a period when cable television was still a kind of new thing. We did not have cell phones. We were not streaming. We did not have Netflix. So the wacky future of Infinite Jest now seems like our present, but it wasn't the case in the 90s, so early 90s and late 80s. And so what I wanted to do was try to reposition Wallace in that moment and see how the cultural forces that were at work in those years might have shaped him and might have produced the writer we know now, a writer whose early traces sometimes get lost amid larger questions of postmodernity and his relationship to pension and so forth. It was a way to narrow the focus down to a specific moment that I remember because I'm old enough, the 80s and the 90s.
Cool, that's great. Have you had some good conversations with people, panels you've attended? What have been some conference highlights for you?
This has been a really a highlight from the beginning. I've loved all the panels I've been a part of. There was one this morning that featured two young scholars dealing with gender, dealing with issues of feminism.
That's a great topic.
And I think it's one of the great areas that we need to go. Mary Holland has been a pioneer there.
Yeah, totally.
Claire Hayes Brady, they've started that discussion. And I'm going to space on their names, but these two scholars, both of them addressed Broom of the System. But they interrogated it in a way that was judicious and exciting, and it just seemed to lay the groundwork for a lot of subsequent work. So that was thrilling to see a new idea. And then, of course, the one we were at, the writers were dealing with religious issues, taking up Adam Kelly's suggestions that maybe Buddhism, Eastern religion might be a component to add to issues of Christianity that have already been addressed. So I've enjoyed watching the field of DFW studies broaden and move away from some of the canonical ideas that I think have been pretty well explored, and it's exciting to see it go in new directions. Yeah.
So you mentioned gender studies being like an area that needs more exploration. Can you think of any other ones that you're, sort of areas that you're excited to see get explored that haven't really been much to this point?
In my talk, I mentioned Wallace's politics.
Yeah.
Wallace's politics seem to me an issue that emerges in the second half of his career in a way that I think, particularly after talking to some of the scholars, might actually retroactively have us reevaluating some of what I was calling a kind of complacent, non-political aspect of his earlier career. But I think he was very attuned to the partisan culture that has emerged post 9/11, which has also been a product of the exact same media world that Infinite Jest anticipated. The internet and Fox News and MSNBC have locked us all into our little boxes of partisanship. We only read what we agree with, and we can't communicate across ideological boundaries anymore. I think Wallace was disturbed by that, and I think it was something he was keenly interested in addressing. And I think some early work has been done on that, but I think I'd like to see some more work on that. And then I think the big issue that keeps coming around is global Wallace.
With Lucas Thompson's book coming out.
So that's happening. I got to read it was an unnamed manuscript sent to me for review, so I don't know who did it, but it was a scholar who combed through all the work to find every reference to German literature. And there's more than I thought. The Dostoevsky components have been there, but so is...
Ping. Dave here. Marshall came up to me the next morning sort of frantically and explained to me that he intended to say Franz Kafka here instead of Dostoevsky. So just to give you a sense of Marshall's commitment to accuracy in Wallace studies. End footnote.
Goethe and Werther, and there's a lot more than I had noticed, and it's an interesting intertext. So Wallace didn't know any other languages, and we know that he had trouble, with his French, but his books are being translated all over the world now. Yeah. We've got it. These conferences are global.
Yeah. Did I tell you I was living in Tel Aviv when I came over to Paris 2 years ago for the conference at the time, and I found there's 3 Wallace translations in Hebrew.
3 different ones.
3 different ones. There's Brief Interviews with Hideous Men. There's a kind of weirdly collected, supposedly fun thing I'll never do again that actually has like short stories in it. Mm-hmm. And then I think there was Girl with Curious Hair as well, which also had a different chapter for him. And I was talking with the bookstore owner, and he mentioned that Infinite Jest is currently being translated into Hebrew, which is just absolutely bewildering.
Well, and in Paris, we met chaps who were translating it into Dutch.
Oh, yeah.
I believe. Luke Herman and some of these guys. So as readers across Europe and Asia begin to absorb Wallace, I think scholars now have an opportunity to think about Wallace outside, the what we think of as these strictly American concerns that he's usually associated with, and it's there. His reading was broad. His reading was wide. He read everything in translation, probably, but nevertheless, I think there's a lot of potential there.
Yeah. Here's a kind of funny question for you, and we can totally cut this if you don't like it. But when I was recently reading Understanding David Foster Wallace for my thesis research, I came across a funny typo.
There are tons in there.
Said,
I'm really sorry.
No, it was actually a really fun one. Instead of DMZ, in one place it says DMX. And I just wondered if you're like a Rough Riders Anthem fan.
I'm not.
And you wanted to slip that.
I wish I were that cool. I know who DMX is. But I don't own any DMX. None of it's on my iPod. So that's just an error. But it's one of many. Here's a funny story on that score. The original hardcover edition made a major interpretation of the Brief Interviews with Hideous Men based on the fact that there are 16. And I connected it to octet, which is, of course, 8. And there are not 16. I think there's 19. And so I had to finesse that and correct that error in the paperback. So I don't know if you can see the surgery work, but that's one of many typos.
Oh, yeah. I can relate. I recently submitted my thesis, and after sort of copy-pasting all the chapters together and then submitting it formally to the school, went and read the PDF after and found a number of fairly egregious issues that I was very embarrassed by, and I made changes and sent them to my supervisor, and I was like, can you send these to Jeff Sievers, please, just so he knows that I know these are issues. And I mentioned it in the defense, and Jeff was like, I didn't really notice too many, don't worry about it.
There is a review. There's a review of Understanding David Foster Wallace written by Murray Susskind from the College on the Hill, which, of course, as you know,
from White
is
Noise.
The character from White Noise. It was published in Modernism and Modernity. It was an omnibus review of Understanding David Foster Wallace and Oblivion. And whoever that was, and there were footnotes, took me to task for the typos in the book.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And I've since asked the editor if that was Wallace who wrote that, and he said that he wanted to maintain the secrecy and the spirit of the gag. So it was a gag, and that's the closest I've come to being reviewed by David Foster Wallace, if it's at all true. Anyway, you can look it up and see if it's in there.
That's hilarious. Well, Marshall, thank you so much for taking the time to talk.
Thank you.
Catch up and talk a little bit of Wallace. It's great having you on the show briefly.
Yes, thank you.
We'll get a fuller interview at some point.
Great. Thanks for having me.
All right. Thanks, Marshall. All right, I'm here now with scholar Jeff Sievers. Jeff, you're out of UBC Vancouver, and of course you've done some great publications recently on the Pale King, and you've got a bunch more kind of in the hopper coming out in the next bit here. You've been a busy guy.
Yeah, I guess so. I published an article about the Pale King and one that was in Critique, and another in Modern Fiction Studies about insurance and Wallace.
Yeah.
And both of those are parts of chapters of the book that I have coming out in January 2017, which is David Foster Wallace's Balancing Books, Fictions of Value, and that's coming from Columbia University Press.
Awesome.
Then. Yeah.
We'll look forward to that. That'll be great. Fun fact about you, Jeff Sievers, you were the external reviewer for my recent thesis defense 2 weeks ago. And so you and I got to sort of work together a little bit and have a really fun conversation for a couple hours via Skype. And so I just want to publicly thank you for passing me and for all your inputs. And so,
by the way, I have to, we have to talk about that a little bit. No, I'm kidding.
I've got some
very
revisions.
Good thesis and very well defended.
Thank you, Jeff. Appreciate that. So you're here at the Wallace Conference in Illinois. What you spoke yesterday? What was the topic of your paper, and what was the panel like, and what kind of conversations have you had over the weekend that have been interesting for you?
Yeah, I was on a panel with the title "From the Female Point of View,"
right.
And my paper was about Mr. Squishy, and it was a paper mainly about the fact that Wallace published it under a pseudonym, Elizabeth Clem, and so from the female point of view was from Wallace's point of view in this paper. The paper was essentially about why he would choose to write under a woman's name. And so it was a paper about gender and about the sort of general pattern in Oblivion and in Mr. Squishy in particular of emasculated men and men who are in some way dominated by larger forces and in many cases by women. I sort of drew some parallels to for instance, Philosophy in the Mirror of Nature and the Norman Bates-like character who's dominated by his mother there. But I think the Mr. Squishy in this argument is really a kind of story about not only the advertising world, but about the number of influences weighing on that story. I've talked primarily about Pynchon and Gravity's Rainbow as a main influence on the story. And I think in Wallace's terms, at least, that thinking about influence gets him thinking about a kind of Oedipal struggle with those influences, patriarchs for my parasite, and about a kind of process of very oblique emasculation that happens in that process. So the conference as a whole, though, has been really great. I've heard some really great things. I was on a panel. On the panel, there was a paper about a feminist reading of Infinite Jest, and specifically Marat and Steepley. I've heard great papers on one by Matt Luter earlier today, to pick out one example about Wallace liking TV a lot more than he lets on in Unibus Plurum, if that's not a ham-fisted summary of Matt's very intricate paper. But I don't know. You've heard a lot of good things too.
Absolutely. It's been great. I went to a panel today, sort of a double panel on Wallace and religion, which of course is very relevant to my topic.
Right.
And I was on a panel that was kind of called Wallace and Religion yesterday. So that's been cool to find other people who are interested in that stream of scholarship too. And there always have been at the other two conferences I've been to. There's always a couple people who have been talking about that topic and are interested in that. So it's great to see kind of a stream towards gender and ethnicity and issues that haven't really been discussed a whole lot in the scholarship yet. Do you see that as a pretty burgeoning direction for study on Wallace?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of potential there. I mean, just there have been at least a couple panels, mine included, here at the conference on gender. There was a later panel with today. I think Christine Peffer, if I have her name right, gave a paper about Room of the System and then Joelle and in Infinite Jest, and sort of reading those characters in terms of neoliberal post-feminism and issues of maternity and neoliberalism and maternal responsibility. I think there's a kind of it is a sort of subtopic with a lot of potential. I mean, I could even imagine, conceivably a collection of essays down the line about the topic of women, gender, masculinism, feminism as it relates to Wallace. And another book that's coming out in the next 4 or 6 months is Lucas Thompson's book,
Yeah.
Global Wallace.
Global Wallace.
He's been at a Wallace conference.
Yeah, I met him
before.
last year here. He's a great guy.
And so that's another example of a kind of opening up of Wallace studies, I think. It's sort of much talked about at the conference, and I think in general in Wallace studies, that irony, sincerity, empathy, and sort of ethics generally, I think, has been where Wallace studies has been located for all the years, really, so far of this kind of wave of scholarship following his death. And I think that's due to kind of open up and gender, race, and globalism, as Lucas's book handles it. Those are all avenues for it opening up. I think in my work that sort of economic reading of Wallace is another main avenue for considering him, especially in relation to neoliberalism and issues of politics that are there in his work. I think long before he makes the explicit turn to civics as a main topic, that I think the Brim of the System has a lot to do with Reagan and Reaganite economic policy, for instance, and he's very concerned with Depression economics, say in the early stories. So I think there are a lot of kind of signs that Wallace studies is going to turn outward.
It's going to bloom out. Yeah. So, do you get to teach much Wallace at UBC Vancouver, or do you do contemporary American stuff and bring him in?
I do, I've taught 2 graduate seminars that were basically all of Wallace sorts of seminars. And though, that's the kind of best setting, really, in which to teach Wallace, because the books don't really, especially Infinite Jest and The Pale King, don't fit many formats. I have taught Infinite Jest to undergraduates alongside Gravity's Rainbow and White Noise, but that's in an honors undergraduate kind of senior seminar sort of setting. I've sort of, I'm taking this next year. I'm not really teaching any Wallace except just a few short stories in one course, and I almost think I should go back to teaching him, because there's a way in which I'm seeing, at least in terms of enrollments and course numbers, that teaching Pynchon and DeLillo doesn't result in the same kind of oversubscribed courses as
but Wallace is getting
does.
more
It's interesting.
interesting.
I mean, we've talked some at the conference about, or Marshall Boswell's keynote in the Q&A was, one of the topics that he covered in his talk, and that was asked about was, why Wallace appeals so much to millennials, and he made a good point about it, about the book really being a description of the world they live in terms of, and we live in, that I live in terms of screen time and the kind of enclosed, lonely way in which we, watch movies, for instance. We watch them on our laptops, etc. And so that I think there's a lot of appetite for Wallace among college age students out there. So I should probably teach him more, I guess is what I'm saying.
I feel like DeLillo is a great gateway to Wallace, and that's actually how I got into Wallace, was through White Noise in a third-year American Lit class. And then as a result of reading DeLillo, my brain exploded, and I was like, I have to read more books like this. And then eventually I got to Infinite Jest a couple of years later.
That's a good pathway.
So I'm a huge DeLillo fan.
That's a good description.
I'm deeply indebted to him.
As Wallace was.
Absolutely.
I think his mind exploded at Amherst in reading DeLillo. He has that great line about not wanting people to focus on all the Pynchon references or indebtedness to Pynchon in The Brim of the System, because I think it's in D.T. Max's biography, because it distracted from the fact that he had cribbed so much from DeLillo.
That's nice. That's awesome. So you're an American living in Canada. You've been in Canada for 7 years now in Vancouver, is that right?
That's right.
So final question, convexity or concavity? Have we won you over yet?
Gosh.
To the Nux side.
to the Nux side of things. All I can say is that I didn't think of Infinite Jest as a book that really had much to do with Canadian politics really until I read it with Canadian students and had some of them, talk about Wallace's mistakes in French, perhaps intentional mistakes, but also be able to, draw upon their actual knowledge, thorough knowledge of Canadian history.
FLQ crisis and stuff like that.
Yeah. I mean, it's obviously a book that deals in caricature and such, but maybe there's a kind of, Canadian studies angle to be taken on Infinite Jest. I don't know if that answers whether it's concavity or convexity, but
you'll remain.
I'll just
you'll defer judgment on this one.
I'll defer to the porousness of certain borders. How about that?
Beautiful. That's a great ender right there. Thanks so much for talking, Jeff.
Yeah.
And if people want to find some of your work, where can they go online?
I have a website, I guess. If you just Google Jeffrey Sievers,
you do
blogspot.com or something like that. And that lists the publications, and the book will be out from Columbia in 2017. And I guess that's a good enough endorsement.
We will eagerly anticipate that. We've talked about you before on the concavity, so.
Oh, really?
I'm
going to have to go search for that.
I can't remember what episode, but I'll dig it up for you.
Okay.
Matt Booker mentions you.
Okay.
In a very positive light, so he'll be thrilled about this. He couldn't be here for the conference this year, but he'll be glad that I caught you.
Cool.
Yeah. Thanks again, Jeff.
Thank you.
And we're here with Corrie Baldauf. You are the first recurring guest on The Great Concavity, Corrie.
What?
So you've had an appearance.
Okay.
And now you're back. Welcome back.
Man, thanks.
You're privileged.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding.
Second, we were talking about second is could be the best or the worst, right?
First is the worst, second's the best, third's a turd.
Yeah, or the one with the hairy chest.
Oh yeah.
So you'll have to see if that's true.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining, Corrie. You were our episode 4 guest, I believe it was, right after Robin O'Neill, who you guys have had sprung up a friendship, I've noticed on Twitter and stuff. That's fun. She's great.
She is really neat.
She's very special.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have I talked to you yet about her recent French fry post in front of her drawing?
Yeah, I loved that. But tell me more, because you've been doing a potato art project. I'm sure you could put it in more sophisticated terms than that, but
we can call it the potato art project. So, but beyond the potato art project,
I'm a Philistine. Have you noticed?
I am also a Philistine. I mean, I have somewhat of an arch in my foot, but I don't know. I don't want to load this too much. But.
I just meant in the sense of I'm uneducated and can't appreciate higher artistic forms.
Liar. I was telling someone about my imagined anthology that you would have of album covers that would align with an art history book. So you'd go through the art history book and there would be all the images in it.
Yeah.
And picture for a 101 course, because that would be a lot of images.
Sure.
And you would have a match album cover for each one.
This influenced this other one,
or you'd look at it and you'd be like, that reminds me of this album cover.
Mm-hmm.
So it would be a sequence of images that would line up.
Right. This came up because we were talking about your 20th anniversary Infinite Jest submission, and I made the comment that it looks kind of reminds me of the Tortoise album standards.
Yeah.
And then that you made that comment, I think, is how it sprung out.
And then I think it's come up in Infinite Winter.
Oh, yeah.
And potentially Great Concavity.
Oh.
I think you reference album cover art
a lot.
Often.
Oh, maybe it's a subconscious thing that I do and I'm not really realizing.
I think there's something where we all collect things. So you go somewhere and so you go visit somewhere or you go to the store and you might not need that thing, but you have this urge to collect it.
Mm-hmm.
You could fit into that category.
Yeah, perhaps. A mental form of collection.
Yeah.
So how's the conference been? Do you want to talk about the potato thing? Yeah.
Well, actually, Robin O'Neill helped me get ready for the conference because she came back from Monastic May and from Silent
Robin?
Summer?
Yeah, we're so glad you're back, Robin. Don't go away again, please.
Yeah, but be careful. Don't put too much of your creative energy into social media.
Yeah. I mean, you got to find the balance, Robbie.
Yeah. So she posted that like right as I'm like putting together my last minute things.
Yeah.
And I was like, no way! Like the French fry is marginalia to Robin O'Neill's art. And she posts the art unfinished and she's like, sneak peek of my art. Yeah. And there's like, do you know what her orbs are? Those floating world orbs that are flying through space with the,
I've seen them, yeah.
Yeah. And then she's holding up the French fry, which is like an indexical sign, and her hand is holding up the French fry in front of the painting.
Yes.
And then I'm talking about digital marginalia, and I was like, oh, Robin won't be there, but I think she'll understand.
Oh, awesome.
So even if no one understood what digital marginalia is,
someone will.
Yeah.
And her name's Robin.
Yeah.
Awesome. That's great. So you have done a couple things here at the conference so far, which started yesterday. What panels have you been on so far, and how did they go? What were the topics?
Okay, so at 10 o'clock today, we did an Infinite Winter panel, and Nathan zoomed in from Australia on the big screen, which was awesome. Like his head was above ours.
Yeah.
And he was pretty sleepy. He woke up at 4:30 in his world. And then it was 12:30 in the morning in Australia when it was 10 a.m. here. Or no, it was 9:30. Yeah.
Okay.
And so that was the split of time.
Yeah.
And so that, to me, was a big part of our success.
Yes.
That he made it there.
Yeah, that was crucial because our panel kind of got decimated because Nathan couldn't come last minute. And then we didn't have Mark and we didn't have Ryan Blanc. And so it was you and me and Jenny Baker.
And Rob was our
And Rob
moderator.
Short moderated.
Yeah.
And we had a joke that we went long with Rob Short on the episode because that was the longest episode to date at that point.
Oh,
and we almost titled it "Going Long with Rob Short," but then we didn't.
That now in posterity, right? Forever. Or can there be like an adjacent album? Wait, is there ever a title of an album that is separate from the original album title? Like people refer to it as like maybe a song that ended up becoming the most well-known. They just named the album that.
I can't think of any examples, but there are like sometimes the best track will be the album title. Yeah. That's a thing sometimes.
So it could have happened.
Maybe.
So now I could
Marine Dreams. The band Marine Dreams, they're a Canadian band from Ontario. They have an album from 2011 called Marine Dreams, and there's a song called Marine Dreams, and they sing the words Marine Dreams. So that, yes, the answer is yes.
Okay.
And I thought of an example on the spot.
That's good. Wow. Which is kind of amazing
at
this time of the day, 2 days into the conference.
Yeah, it is. What is it, 8 to 10 p.m.?
Yeah.
Yeah. I've had no alcohol yet today.
Cheers to that.
There will be cheers. So we did the Infinite Winter panel. That was a lot of fun to relive our glory days as writing compatriots. So behind the scenes glimpse here, Corrie and I would send our drafts each week to each other for proofreading and critical insights and things like that. So it was fun to revisit that today with Jenny and Nathan.
It totally was. Yeah. That was good. And to be in real space, well, virtual space is real also. But I think we did okay representing everyone. I'll be curious to. Yeah. We got like excerpts in, and I had another thought. Okay.
So you did another panel today. So you double paneled today, which is pretty laborious, with Mike Miley, who we're going to hear from soon, and Matt Luter as well. You're going to hear from him soon too.
Yeah.
The kids are lined out in the hallway to come in here for these interviews. So what did you guys talk about in your panel?
We didn't talk about Kids in the Hall.
Oh,
but
speaking of great Canadian pop culture.
But it was pretty awesome. I especially liked talking with them leading up to coming here and proposing that we would apply together. I'd be curious to know how many people applied together. Like you applied, did you apply? No, you applied solo. And then you were matched.
And then, yeah. Although originally they had me as my own panel for an hour.
Yeah.
And I was like, no, I just have like a 15-minute paper. Can there be some other people with me? Because that's not going to happen.
and
so anyways, it worked out in the end, yeah. Nathan was supposed to be on my panel, but he couldn't make it. So it was Samantha, no relation, Wallace, and I spoke about identity and religion in Infinite Jest.
I enjoyed that.
Thanks.
The first day was awesome because I could go from one thing to the next knowing exactly who would be talking and that I definitely wanted to be there.
Yeah.
Like there was no guessing or intuitive pendulum swinging or like blind drawing from hats.
Yeah. Like the choices were fairly clear.
And
based on people that you know that you knew that you wanted to see their talk. Yeah. Cool. So you guys talked about, was it like music and television and digital marginalia in the panel? Yeah. Can you unpack your part of that a little bit?
I can try. So digital marginalia, a good brief way to describe it, in one of the emails that Matt and Mike and I were corresponding to each other, Mike's like, hey, you have to check out this book, or he didn't say we have to. He's not rude like that.
Tyrant Mike Miley. Yeah.
There's this book that I think really goes along the lines of what we're all doing, The World Beyond Your Head. And I was thinking about it and realized I'm talking about digital marginalia, and that's like a really great, succinct way to sum up what I'm going for. So with regular marginalia, with the origin of the word marginalia, there's no regular in Normal, Illinois.
Recurring joke of the weekend.
Yeah, sorry. I don't want to say regular because I'm having trouble with words like good and bad and
normative, maybe.
Typical. I'll just say original. The original rump shaker. No. But so the original rump shaker marginalia, it happens in your head or with the author. So Mike bringing up this title, The World Beyond Your Head, with digital marginalia, I'm trying to emphasize the conversations that we're having surrounding Wallace's text, but also other things that we're reading or projects that we're working on. And when the conversation moves off the page and outside of your head. So at one point I had an image of a dancer in Detroit. She's like crouching in this like grassy lawn area, and she's wearing a gray wig, but she's like all stretched out, like next to this old Mercedes, but her stage is like this burned out part of the lawn where the Mercedes used to be. And around her is like all this chicken wire and like condenser, like cardboard boxes. And so I had an image of just her head, like as a little oval. And so I was like, so this is Biba Bell's head. You know, and so for digital marginalia, you have to go outside of that. And then I add the rest of the image and you see all that surrounding information. So it's like, how do you go outside of the conversation or dialogue that's happening in your head? And that, how could that evolve the way you're thinking about what you're doing? But how could that also inspire or impact the things that are outside of what you're doing with Wallace's writing?
Very cool.
Yeah.
Did you get some good Q&A after? Some good engagement?
Yeah. I believe her name is Clare.
Yeah.
She asked like, oh, so I'm not sure if I'm on the right track, but could digital marginalia not be written down? Could it just be spoken? And I was like, yeah. And so then I started thinking about how digital marginalia is surrounding one's subject. So if you're at a talk or if we all read the same reading, there's that one subject, but then if you think about that as like the center of a bike wheel, it has all these tangents coming off of it. That would be the digital marginalia, and then you like kind of see where it would roll.
Oh yeah, and sparks maybe would be the other analogy that you talked about today in the panel.
Yeah,
sweet, awesome, very cool. Sounds like it was really fun. I had to miss it, unfortunately. I'm sorry, but there was a panel on religion, and so I had to go because that was my topic. So, anyways, but. It's been great catching up with you, Corrie, and we hope to have you on it again at a future time for a third appearance. Thanks for taking the time out.
Thanks a lot, Dave.
All right, I'm here now with Matt Luter. Matt, welcome to the Great Concavity. Thanks for coming on.
Glad to be here.
You are from
Jackson, Mississippi.
Jackson, Mississippi, that's
yes.
right. And you were on a panel today with Corrie Baldauf and Mike Miley, and I heard that it was an absolute riot, what you did, that it was total blast, and I'm sorry I missed it. Tell us a bit about your panel. Corrie just talked about the digital marginalia portion of hers. So tell us a bit about your work. I know you've done some work on Jonathan Lethem, who I did a paper on here last year, and we had a great chat about that. So tell us a bit about your background, and then tell us about your panel today.
Sure. I have been working with Wallace since my dissertation days, several years back.
Do you miss those days? Ish
is a good answer. And as you mentioned, wrote Understanding Jonathan Lethem for South Carolina Press, and
so that's like the equivalent of Understanding David Foster Wallace, Boswell's one.
In that it is in the same series on the same press.
Nice,
yes.
Sweet.
So have been working on Lethem, but also Wallace here and there as well.
Yeah.
What I was working with today was sort of rethinking how we talk about and make use of E Unibus Plurum. Because we're very accustomed to using it to talk about those early stories in Girl with Curious Hair, particularly Little Expressionless Animals, particularly My Appearance, since those are so TV-centric and tend to focus on TV that is entertaining, but is also can be very formulaic. And so what I was focusing on instead is what happens if you set E Unibus next to Infinite Jest, and some of the later short stories too. And what I see going on there is the juxtaposition is not so, the comparison is not so one-to-one. And that's because the overall take on television in E Unibus is pretty negative. And I think that's in part because a lot of the examples Wallace is choosing to focus on there and to record are things that are kind of silly.
Like easy targets, kind of?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So a bit of a like scarecrow tactic, straw man.
Oh, maybe a little bit because, he mentions metal videos and he mentions televangelists and he mentions American Gladiators and
all the most extreme stuff. Ridiculous.
Or things that, easy targets is a really good description there. And yet, when we see characters in Infinite Jest watching television, at least real television that actually exists, it tends to be really good stuff. What in the 80s, early 90s, the term that was really commonly getting used was quality television. People are watching Hill Street Blues and St. Elsewhere and Cheers and MASH. And these are things that, at least in the TV landscape of the time, were so consistently the opposite of those easy targets. This was the TV you were not supposed to be feeling guilty about watching.
Right.
And so I think for me, what it winds up demonstrating is there's a kind of softening of his attitude towards TV in that novel, or at the very least, he's allowing a greater range of responses from viewers. In E Unibus, when he talks about that Pepsi ad, he sort of compares it to how this is an ad that is almost like activating viewers in a Pavlovian way, right? Of you don't have a choice. There's only one way you can really respond to that ad. There's a wider range of responses to better choices of television in Infinite Jest. Hal writes that pretty solid for a couple of page little close reading of Hill Street Blues.
Yeah.
That is pretty accurate about how that is a more narratively and cognitively complex piece of television than some of the nonsense in E Universe.
Right.
When Oren talks about how much he misses the old days of TV when there were commercials and there were reruns before the cartridge era, he gets a little misty-eyed and he gets a little nostalgic in ways that would never have been allowed for, or at least smiled upon in E Universe. And then even something like Steeply talking about his father being obsessed with MASH.
With MASH, yeah.
It's clearly in certain ways a painful memory for him, how his father changes by the end of that anecdote.
Yeah.
But even then, I find it really telling that when Steeply is talking with Marat at the end of that, and Marat says, "Oh, I see, so this American television program killed your father." And Steeply is like, "Well, no, it was his heart." And so there is a kind of, he's not going to get apocalyptic about the sort of excess of viewing there in ways that he's really, for me as a reader, looking down on excess of viewing really intensely in E Universe.
Yeah.
So that's what I was focusing on. And then also the idea that, kept coming back to the idea that, it's certainly not just me saying these are better TV shows. These things like St. Elsewhere, Hill Street, these are all things that TV scholars, TV critics are looking at as the things that set up the second golden age that we're in now.
Yeah.
In terms of creating things that are more serialized, more narratively complex. And for somebody like the writer Stephen Johnson, who wrote a wonderful book called Everything Bad is Good for You, about how popular culture actually keeps getting more complex in terms of the demands it makes on us cognitively as viewers.
Yeah.
For him, it's just in terms of the structure and the form and the poetics of these shows, they are actually demanding more of viewers than the kinds of things that Wallace is very dismissive of in the universe.
What particular shows does he address there?
Does who? Stephen Johnson?
Yeah, Stephen Johnson.
He does this amazing thing. It's a wonderful book where he actually graphically sort of charts the complexity of. He starts with Dragnet, which is a straight line because it is a procedural. Every episode is one case. Yeah. We do not get into the personal lives of the investigators. It's just we are following one case, and he sort of says it's a straight line, and as a result, it's entertaining, but it doesn't place a lot of cognitive demands on us as viewers.
Yeah.
The next place he goes, I think weirdly enough, is Starsky and Hutch.
Okay.
Because it's still one case, one episode, but there's a little
there's some character development over time.
A little, and there's usually like some kind of like business at the beginning and end of the episode.
Okay.
There's like a setup and then a punchline.
Oh yeah.
48 minutes later or whatever.
Oh yeah.
So he says this is a tiny step forward, and then by the time you get to Hill Street Blues, it's a dozen intersecting lines with this sprawling cast. We follow them professionally and personally, and then it looks pretty similar when he maps out The Sopranos.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And that's kind of where he ends The Sopranos.
That's
the last big example.
Yeah, because it is, I think, 2006, 2007, somewhere in there.
Yeah. So this really leads me to think about, if Wallace were still alive today, how do you think that he would be thinking about the moves the developments that have happened in television in the last decade or so?
Well,
because we're, like you're saying, so we're getting into shows now with like The Wire and Breaking Bad and Game of Thrones and The Americans, shows that are by all accounts pretty critically acclaimed and have huge amounts of development, and you have to do some serious work to engage and think about them.
Well, I think I mentioned in my paper today one thing that I did not want to do is have the like umpteenth think piece on how TV is the new novel.
Right.
Because there's stuff that novels can do that television can't, and there's stuff that television can do that novels can't.
Yeah,
and,
for sure.
So I guess so it's tough. It's tricky to speculate what would he think about this now, but I think that is one thing that I imagine he would be on board with, I guess, is the idea that there is a formal specificity to the medium. I know loads of people have made the connection that the cartridges in Infinite Jest seem to sort of prefigure on-demand viewing, Netflix, streaming video, all this kind of thing. Wallace is such a writer for me of the cable age. By which I mean, like, there is this time period, I feel like, from early 80s to mid 90s or so, when the internet era kind of takes it over, where there is this sense of information overload. I mean, it's in DeLillo, it's in some Richard Powers, it's all over the place. But we're not yet to the point where, like, trying to get a hold of it all is a fool's errand and just futile. I think when we get to writers who are way, way more internet era, like, there's the sense of, we throw up our hands because who can keep all of this straight? Cable era stuff seems so much like there is a lot out there, but the number of channels is still finite and two-digit. And so there's a way that it still seems barely possibly manageable. And I guess that's one thing that perhaps the cartridges in Infinite Jest sort of look ahead to is your options are limitless.
Insane proliferation of personally disseminated entertainment.
And as a result, like, you're never gonna see it all, and you probably shouldn't try.
Clearly that would be a bad way to live your life. In a way, I mean, it'd be fun, but
it'd be fun.
You might not have time for
but
anything
you may have
else.
time for nothing else at all,
like a job or relationships or things of that nature.
Those are nice too.
Those are good things. Well, Matt, thank you so much for swinging by. I appreciate
you.
your time. And anything like coming up in the hopper academic-wise for you on Wallace, or just kind of chilling out at the moment?
I'm figuring now probably on hopefully turning this into an article, what I did today,
Great.
And expanding it. Maybe looking forward to some of the later stories that are working with TV as well.
Cool.
Suffering Channel. Few people have mentioned to me, oh my gosh, you're talking about Cheers and Infinite Jest, so you have to talk about Cheers and Good Old Neon. Which I agree. I'm going to have to do that.
That's awesome. Where can people find you online if they want to check out your stuff? Or do you have a website or academia?
I do not.
You're impossible to find. You're going to have to go through the NSA to find.
I am an infrequent user of Twitter and so forth. So
all right. Cool. Well, thanks, Matt Luter. Appreciate your time, man.
Thank you, Dave.
All right. All right, we are here now with Mike Miley from New Orleans. Mike, welcome to the Great Concavity, man.
Thank you, Dave. Glad to be here.
Your name has been on the show a few times. Matt and I both have been friends with you for a while, but we just, for whatever reason, haven't got you on as a guest yet, which look out for that in the future, we're hoping.
Oh, cool. That'd be great.
If you want, that'd be cool.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and so this is the third Wallace conference that I've been at with you.
Yes.
We met in Paris 2 years ago, and we were both here last year, and so this is round 3.
Yes.
Yeah. It's great.
Absolutely.
It's good to see you again. Hang out.
It's very good to see you too.
Yeah, man. So you have a master's degree, and you specialize quite a bit in film studies, and tend to think about Wallace a lot in those terms.
A bit, yeah. I mean, I bounce around a lot.
Yeah,
so I have a master's in fine arts and film directing from the American Film Institute, and then, but also wound up when I got into teaching English, kind of got back into essay writing and things like that, and so now I kind of. Some of my academic writing or my fun writing is about movies, and some of it's about literature. Mm-hmm. Most of the lit stuff I've wound up doing is about Wallace.
Yeah.
And I think probably some of the Wallace stuff I've done has been kind of at least like film or televisual related. And then,
Yeah, and you've had a few publications in the last year or two, yeah?
Yeah, it's been...
Had some stuff on Medium, was it?
Okay, yeah. So I did a couple of the pieces that A24 had commissioned for that. About the bandana and about him as an interview subject. And then in the paper I presented in Paris came out in February in Critique. And then did a post for Infinite Winter,
Yeah.
filmography thing
Yes,
for that.
that's right.
And I guess prior to that, like a bigger stuff, like other things were a publication about David Lynch and rock music, and then written a couple things about movies for The Atlantic, and the annotations piece that was in the Smart Set for another Wallace piece.
Yeah. So you're a pillar of the community,
Oh,
Mike Miley.
I guess so. Yes, I'm a little Wallace urban achiever. Yeah, I'm proud we are of all of them.
So you were on a panel today with Corrie and Matt,
yes,
who we just spoke to,
yes,
back to back. Tell us a bit about your chapter of the panel.
Oh yeah, so my thing is about Oblivion. I didn't at the time for submitting the abstracts, I didn't really know what I wanted to do, except I wanted to write about Oblivion because it's something I found really challenging, and kind of wanted to figure out like why is it so hard, or what's something about it I sense is different from the other work, and so I wanted to take a chance to figure out, well, what is it that makes it different. And in doing it, I was thinking about what I had done in Paris and some other things I've been working on with Wallace, and realizing that it seemed to me a different narrative strategy that he's using in Oblivion from elsewhere. And so I sort of went with that, going with so many things when people talk about Wallace, talk about this feeling that like, oh yeah, I feel like he's talking to me, or like I feel like he's right there, or like it's him, and there's not that layer of removal that people experience reading most writers, even writers who put themselves in the book, right? I mean, even something like Philip Roth or Bret Easton Ellis, when like you can tell like this is a caricature, where with Wallace, I think, excepting maybe The Pale King and other stories, it feels a little bit more closer to, or it gives you encourages you to view it as closer to the real thing.
Right.
And what I think I noticed in Oblivion was that a lot of those things are kind of gone, or don't really seem to be there as prominently. And so it seemed like it was really characterized by absence. And then I'm thinking, well, it's a collection called Oblivion. Everything's really, really bleak. Yeah. And there's this real feeling of absence. And so the paper is it's called Verbal Chaos. And it's largely about how, from looking at that collection, we can see how important a sense of authorial presence is to Wallace's fictional project, because the stories in Oblivion have a lot of difficulty achieving some of those goals, and it may be because this narrative strategy is largely absent. So that's the main thrust of it, and kind of arrives at an idea that not only is perhaps does the author, it sort of tracks each individual story, and not necessarily chronologically, but then ends at the Suffering Channel to make the claim that so not only does the artist need to be present making his or her art the way Britt Mulkey is at the end of that story, like, so you have to be there, he has to produce it in front of you, but there's the artist who needs to be present, and a witness as well. The witness figure needs to be there. With one or the other absent, then the project loses its context and potentially can be forgotten about or disappear, and wind up in a state of oblivion.
Yeah, I've noticed that Oblivion's showing up pretty big this year at this conference.
I was really surprised.
Good old Neon,
even to the point where there were 2 Oblivion panels going on at the same time.
Yeah,
and couldn't you had to, I ran from one to the other, essentially. Yeah, because usually it's the one that that and Broom, I guess, are the ones that people don't talk about as often, but you'll hear things about Good Old Neon quite a bit, but the other stories kind of, I don't really remember seeing much. I guess last year Conley did a paper about possession that used Soul Without a Smithy and The Pale King, doing stuff with The Exorcist.
And then Mitch did a paper in Paris about The Soul Is Not a Smithy.
Yeah,
as well.
And
Mitch Cunningham from Australia.
Yes, and then the first Wallace conference, Carissa Halston did this really knockout paper about looking at the Suffering Channel as a modern reinterpretation of Dante's Inferno, and looking at sort of like how some different circles of hell correspond to things in the story. It was great.
Cool.
Yeah, that was like my favorite thing I saw at that first conference.
Awesome.
It was really good.
Cool. So how was the Q&A engagement with your part of the paper? Did you get some good?
It was good. We were at the end of the day, and so I think a lot of people were sort of cued and A'd out, right? So we and I think because things were running long, like our period was a little bit shorter, so not not a ton yet, but like I think I'm just gonna kind of like pull people aside who were there and kind of be like, so like.
So,
really, like, what,
how good was my talk on a scale
right,
of
I mean,
1 to
like,
11?
Do you like me? Right, yeah, from a scale of like 9 to 10, like how much did this really like do it for you? Great paper or greatest paper, right? But
just give them a false dichotomy.
Yeah,
perhaps.
So I mean, I'll have to kind of figure out like because the way I do things, like I write the longer version and then cut it down.
Yeah.
I know a lot of
I
other
did
people
that
kind
too.
of they just write the conference talk and expand it later.
Yeah,
and
right.
I just I don't quite know what I'm saying when I start to write it, so I've got to like write the whole thing and then kind of distill it.
Yeah.
So I'll have to corner some people and kind of be like, hey, or send the longer version and say what tell me what you
Get some
tell me what's
feedback.
going on here before I start sending it out.
Yeah, cool. Speaking of Oblivion, we had kind of a funny back and forth on Twitter this week with one of our online friends, Madam Psychosis.
Oh, yeah.
Megan, and she was saying that she gave her mom Oblivion to read as the first Wallace piece. Like, hey, this is the author that I love. Check this out.
Right.
And her mom was like pretty nonplussed, I think.
Yeah.
And I was like, whoa, that's bold to give your mom Oblivion. Like, and then you were like, well, maybe it's a good litmus test,
Yeah, I mean,
that
like,
could be intriguing.
Yeah, I mean, Wallace talks about like, how Infinite Jest might have this high bar of entry in the first 200 pages or so, but then like once you climb that hurdle, it's a lot easier. Yeah. And that's, I mean, the first 200, all of Infinite Jest, to me at least, is like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory compared to Mr. Squishy. I mean, like there is, I mean, it's like Go Fox Go or whatever that one's called. And so I think, if you really want to be like, look, I don't want to waste your time or mine. Like if we're gonna be together on this, like I need to know right now.
Where you're at.
Like Mr. Squishy's probably a good but honestly, like I don't know if I would pass that test, but I think like that's a gutsy, honest test,
totally.
Right? That's like throw down the gauntlet.
Yeah.
Can you really hang or not? I mean, but I feel like that's probably a story somebody needs to work up toward.
Yeah.
I mean, I think Incarnations of Burned Children gets used a lot as like to kind of pass people to be like, oh, here, try this one, especially I think for high schools, right? Because it's so short, and it's like a fairly standard short story by comparison to his other stuff. So I mean, but I think very seldom is Oblivion ever used as anyone's entry point into Wallace. And I mean, I think that's sort of even borne out in its relative lack of attention up to this point academically even. I mean, there's certainly stuff out there, but it is not, it certainly ranks near the bottom of, I mean, like everything and more gets less attention, right? But so many things get written about way more, yet I go back and forth on this. For a while I thought, oh, well, no, in 10 years, this is going to be the thing that people are really, like, Brief Interviews and Oblivion are going to be the things that people are really focusing on. Yeah. I don't know whether I still feel that way about Oblivion, but I do think we were talking with a few people just a moment ago. The interesting thing about those particular stories, particularly something like The Suffering Channel or The Soul Is Not a Smithy, is that there are so many different ideas being worked in about American history, about America's cultural moment, and in addition to all of the stuff about attention and sincerity and awareness and like all of the other things that we talk about. Yeah. But the difficulty, I think, is that they're very difficult to separate from each other. That you can't necessarily it's very difficult to look at it just at one of those lenses without feeling like you need to rope the other one in. And I mean, certainly that's the case with Infinite Jest or something like that, but it's a little more understandable given that it's a 1,000-page novel. But Soul Without a Smithy is like a 50-page story, and it's got that density to it that makes it really hard to approach in a sort of focused way, because it's very, even though it's long, it's what's going on, and it seems very expansive. So I wonder whether that's also part of the difficulty as well. How do we approach this, these stories? Because it seems like there are so more layers and that can't be separated.
Yeah, cool. Anything else going on for you at the conference this year?
Just coming to see friends. Mostly just, I mean, a big selling point was I'm going to get to see people I haven't seen in a year, and and spend time with everybody. So that's good.
Yeah, it's real good. It's been a blast. any other major highlights of the weekend for you?
Well, this is, I think I really did like, I got to moderate my first panel ever.
Yeah, me too. I followed your cues.
Yeah, and I enjoyed that. I mean, like 2 very different papers about octet, and I thought, okay, cool, this is a lot of fun, and I wish we could have had longer to talk about all of that, because I was really interested in the perspectives that were in both of those papers that Corrie Hudson and Thomas Moore did. And I thought, oh man, like this, if we could have another half hour and really get into some cool territory with it. Yeah. So that was fun. That was a good way to kick off the conference for me.
Awesome. That's great, Mike. Yeah. Where can people find your writing, find you on Twitter? Okay. You're pretty active on Twitter.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And so if you want like play-by-plays of the conference, Mike's been like rapid firing quotes and stuff like that. So
yeah, I did try to live tweet for the folks who couldn't be here. So I'm at Mike C. Miley, Miley, and then the writing, I probably need to find a place to collect all of it. I mean, like
a website or something?
Yeah, what's that? Yeah, I need one of them. But I guess the David Lynch piece is available through JSTOR. The critique piece is like behind a really thick paywall, so you need to run to your nearest university library and use the free terminal to do a search term, and then the there's stuff on theatlantic.com, and the Wallace annotation piece is on the SmartSet website. So it's sorry, that was it.
You're a man about the internet,
right?
A variety of places.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, throw a rock online and you'll hit me.
Awesome, Mike. Thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Appreciate it, man.
Appreciate it.
All right.
All right, I'm here now with Samantha, no relation Wallace. Sam, is that true? No relation to David Foster Wallace?
As far as I know. I mean, I don't know. I'm kind of hoping that it's not true, but so far it's true.
Well, right on. So, Sam, you and I just presented together on the same panel at the conference. And,
that's right.
You gave a talk about David Foster Wallace, Infinite Jest, and grammar, which was riveting and totally fantastic. So it was great that we got to hang out on that panel and do Q&A together and all that stuff. We were supposed to have Nathan Seppolt as well from Australia, but unfortunately he had to cancel sort of last minute. But you gave like a really sweet shout out to the Great Concavity at the start of your talk, and it elicited this applause from the audience, which was
very
like
enthusiastic.
Which was one of like the most life affirming, project affirming things that happened for me in recent memory. So I just want to thank you for that. It was so sweet, and thanks to everyone who was in the crowd who showed their support for the show and this project and what we're doing. So
and thanks from all of us for doing what you do. This is great. You're like,
hey, it's seriously Matt and I's pleasure, like
keeping us plugged in while we're not with other Wallace fans. It's it's important.
Yeah, it's amazing that we can sort of continue the community stuff, which is so palpable and amazing at the conference. The sense of camaraderie is just out of this world, I think, and a lot of people have been saying that in these interviews, and getting to continue the conversation on Twitter and here and other places is just so rad. So that next year when we all get together again, it's just like nothing, we haven't missed a beat, so that's great.
It's awesome.
So you're a PhD student currently. Where are you located?
I'm in Charlottesville, Virginia. I'm at the University of Virginia.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And you're originally from California?
That's right. Yeah, I grew up in Southern California, lived in LA and San Francisco, and now I'm out here, so.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
And what are you studying in your program? Are you doing Wallace specifically for a dissertation, or where does he land sort of in your purview there?
Yeah, so originally I thought I was going to do Faulkner. UVA has a really great Faulkner collection, but I read Infinite Jest and was sort of pulled by Wallace into the latter half of the 20th century, so it's sort of still up for debate what exactly will be in the dissertation, but I think there's a good chance Wallace will be in there. It's hard to turn down the opportunity of having a first scholarly monograph be titled Wallace on Wallace when you have that opportunity. So
you cannot pass that.
It's sort of like destiny, I think.
Love it. That's great. So tell us about your talk that you just gave.
Yeah, so I it's a good thing the talk was at 3 or 4 p.m. because I did talk a lot about grammar and infinite jest and Wallace's Authority in American Usage essay. And what I'm really interested in is thinking about how Wallace's philosophy of language kind of becomes alive in Infinite Jest, and if what he said in Authority in American Usage, if that sort of clashes or gels at all with what's happening in Infinite Jest. So my talk started with Authority in American Usage, and then moved on to kind of look at different instances of error, kind of comedic and otherwise, in Infinite Jest, and sort of how we see that played out. So
yeah. That was great. You got into some like really technical grammatical stuff
I know.
that I've never even heard of before. So I was like, it was riveting.
Halfway through the talk, I was like, this might have been a terrible mistake, and like talking about like subjunctive moods with a bunch of strangers. But I don't know. It's what gets me going, and hopefully it can translate to other people in some way. I think throwing some comedy in there always helps out when you're doing a grammar breakdown. But
totally.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that like anyone who's into Wallace is gonna be used to that kind of conversation. Anyways, like Avril and Candenza and Infinite Jest and the Militant Grammarians of Massachusetts and all that stuff too.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, I mentioned to you just recently that one of my really good friends back home, Amy Pelche, is reading Infinite Jest for the first time right now. She's really into grammar and like politeness and etiquette, and she texted me that she's loving Infinite Jest, and mainly because of Avril and Candenza. That Avril's her favorite character, and she's just like losing her mind about how much she loves Avril.
Yeah, remind me how far she is.
Well, how far in is she?
Yeah.
Like, we'll see what she says like later.
Yeah, if she really goes through all of Infinite Jest and Avril stays constant as her favorite, I would love to talk to her about how that happens. Yeah, because I mean, I also obviously love grammar, although I don't think I'd consider myself a snoop, but Avril is, she's a tough one.
Yeah. Her text to me was, quote, "The wheels of adjectival justice continue. LOL, Avril is the best."
Yeah, the few, the proud, the mortified with everybody else. Something like that.
That's awesome. Yeah. So how do you feel like the talk went in terms of Q&A? What kind of response? What kind of conversations did you have with people after?
It was great. I mean, I had kind of pitched the ideas to some of my colleagues at UVA, but there was so much explaining that went on, just background about Wallace and Infinite Jest, that when I gave the talk at the conference, I mean, I already had people right there who were so much more familiar and plugged in with Wallace that I thought the response was pretty great. I mean, you were on that panel, so had a really receptive audience. They asked great questions, but I mean, you don't get that kind of audience, that sort of expertise anywhere else, which is why having a single author conference is so awesome, because if you really want feedback on your ideas, you really have to talk to those people who just know it inside out, and that's kind of exactly what I found with that audience. I got some really good grammar questions that I wasn't really able to answer, and maybe I should have provided a disclaimer that I was, as the speaker, was not therefore proclaiming myself as a grammar expert. But yeah, I had some really great questions about grammar, and people brought up some instances in Jest where they saw other errors happening, errors in the text where a speaker would say something like, "I have half of this and half of this and half of this," and another speaker would say like, "Well, that's just nonsense," and like, that's great because it's got kind of the text auto-correcting itself and really dealing with that in a self-aware kind of way, and like, yeah, that's awesome. That's cool. Yeah, so that was great.
Yeah.
And just a fun group to be around, like fun people.
Yeah. So this was your first Wallace conference, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So did you feel like you came away making some pretty great friends?
Yeah. We had sort of a little cohort ran around and talked about our papers, and conferences are great for you because you make kind of like Insta friends. There's no time to, there's no time to kind of waste. You have to talk about your ideas right away and really get to know people right away. So it was a great first experience. I would definitely come back. Yeah.
Actually, so this is a funny, like, sort of paratextual thing. You and I are actually not at the conference right now. We're meeting via Skype because we were going to sit down for our interview on the last day. And then you were like, I have to go, I have to catch a train. And I was like, okay, no problem. Like, we'll record it later. But the next day when I went to the Bloomington Normal Airport to fly out, John Mango was on the same flight as I.
Oh, that's great.
And you guys were friends.
Yeah. We are friends, present tense, yep.
He was in your crew. And, and him and I sat together on the plane. We asked the person if we could swap seats. And we talked about Wallace for like 2 hours to Minneapolis and then another hour in the airport and had like, one of the most like life-affirming conversations of my entire life, just hearing his story.
Yeah,
and
shout out to John Mango
as a future guest. Yeah,
that would be awesome.
Like he was telling me some stuff about his life that I just almost started crying at one point. Like the way that Wallace has been so important and significant for him was
totally
just
personal,
really personal and really out of this world. And I think we all sort of have a deeply personal connection with Wallace's material in a way that you probably don't find with a lot of other writers.
Yeah. It just sort of like rips you right up. It gets in there right away. Yeah. There's sort of no, there's no time, like I said, to sort of waste. It just gets right at you. And so it'd be great. John Mango's. Shout out to John Mango. Yeah,
John
he's the
Mango
greatest.
is the man.
Yep.
I know. I'm so excited. Him and I have been emailing since we got back and talking about like video games and board games and stuff, and we have a lot in common, so it's been great.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
So we talked a little about like future work plans for dissertation. Any ideas for like next year's conference, what you might want to present about if you were to come back?
I'm kind of new to Wallace, so I read Infinite Jest for the first time last fall in a class, and after reading it, had that initial response of like frustration and just like what, and so I started it over again. And so after I did that, I decided that I was going to work through all of his work chronologically. So I've been going through that, and I don't know what it would be yet. I think I'd kind of like to work with Girl with Curious Hair a little bit.
Cool.
Tiny Expressionless Animals, something along those lines.
Yeah, that's like one of my favorite stories.
So good. Yeah. And there wasn't a whole lot of his early work, I didn't think, at the conference this time around. So maybe some of his earlier short stories. Westward is such a slog, but I don't know. It might be worth.
Yeah, the novella.
Yeah, it might be worth pulling apart a little bit, but. Yeah. Cool. We'll see. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, Sam, where can people sort of find some work you've done or get in touch with you on Twitter? Are you around on like the social media things at all?
Oh gosh, I'm such a Luddite. Right now, the best place to reach me is probably my academic email, which is kind of gibberish because I think they're trying to make it secure, but that is saw5zw@virginia.edu. And I love getting queries and emails.
Cool. That is a pretty obtuse address, yeah.
Yeah.
They're trying to keep you like under the radar or something.
I don't know what it is.
You cannot be kept under the radar.
I was so looking forward to having a name, like my name in an email, and then I got like a bunch of gibberish numbers.
It's pretty dehumanizing, isn't it?
Yeah. So that's the best way to reach me now. At some point in the future, my students will convince me to get a social media profile of some sort, but for now,
I would actually really encourage you to get on Twitter, because the Wallace conversation that's been happening on Twitter, like even in the last 2 days, has been absolutely bananas. So
conference related or otherwise?
Yeah, conference related.
Right.
It's like everyone is just like, we're just all going nuts, and it's been a ton of fun. So I'd encourage you to get in on that.
I will do it. Yeah, I haven't seen it happening on Wallace L, so that's where it is.
Yeah.
That's where the conference conversation is. So.
Yeah.
Cool.
Get on it. Join the party.
Will do.
Sam, thanks so much for talking to us at the Great Concavity. We are so excited to have you as part of the community, as you're having come to your first conference, and are excited to see what develops from you in the future.
Thanks so much, Dave. It's been a pleasure.
All right. Yeah, likewise. Thanks.
Mamacita.